Welcome to Grace-Led Conversations, a podcast on ministry insights for connecting more of your community to Christ and His church. This is a joint podcast between SIN Louisiana and Grace-Led Communications. SIN Louisiana's primary goal is about seeing the kingdom of God expand throughout the state of Louisiana through primarily church planting with the Louisiana Baptist Convention and the North American Mission Board. Grace-Led Communications is a digital communications agency, and we primarily serve churches and nonprofits. We're looking to everything from web design and social media to digital advertisements, print design, graphic design, and all those ways. All we are doing both as ministries is trying to help continue the cause of Christ and glorify God in all the different ways we can as we make Him known throughout our state. My name is Rob Russell, and I am excited to be here this morning with our guest, Dr. Derek Kitterlin. Man, if you could share a little bit about yourself, some of your roles and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Thank you for allowing me to come in and be a part of this conversation this morning. My name is Dr. Derek Kitterlin. I am pastor of New Life Community Church, an 8-year-old replant in Covington, Louisiana. I'm also contract faculty for the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary and Leavell College. I am vice president for the Evangelical Homiletical Society, but most importantly, I am the husband of an amazing wife, Stephanie, and 5 children, Allie, Tori, Chloe, I got to close my eyes and think about it, Riley, and Oliver, stretching from 17 down to 2. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to have you. This is, and that's also quite the list.
Yes.
As someone with one child with a second on the way, but also just the various hats that you're wearing, both in local church ministry as well as what you do with the seminary. I know you have another new venture that's getting started as well too. We'll talk a little bit more about later. But as we've gotten to know each other over the past several months, one of the things that stood out to me is how you're able to work and serve in kind of these multiple callings that God's given you, both in local church ministry as well as how you're serving the broader church through the seminary.
Yes.
So I figured how we could use our time here together today is maybe having a little bit of conversation on not just on balance with wearing a lot of those hats and the various roles that we have as pastors and church planters, but also kind of get a little bit more into how to glorify God. Whether there are pastors listening to this, church planters that might be considering or already bivocational.
Sure.
They might be bivocational by force, and that's not their preference. They might be more co-vocational, is a newer term we use, where they see God giving them certain gifts and opportunities to leverage in a variety of different ways for the kingdom. And so let's just start off with the 2 of the main roles that you have as a local church pastor, as well as being a professor at the seminary here in New Orleans. A lot of times Bivo guys think of their different jobs kind of in terms of, hey, this is my primary job, this is my secondary job.
Sure.
Do you think that's helpful to kind of compartmentalize that way, or to rank them and whenever you have multiple jobs in ministry?
I do to a certain extent, because when we'll use the term bivocational, understanding that we could also mean co-vocational, because, for the sake of clarity throughout we don't want to sync the podcast with terminology, but bivocational, there's always going to be one job. I mean, maybe there's a rare exception that requires more time, that provides more money, that requires more mental energy. And that's just going to be naturally your primary job. One of these is going to have to be your primary focus, because when you're in that position, that situation, you are, like you said, some by choice, more Covo, but Bivo, either the church is not big enough, or the situation it's not conducive for full-time work. Whatever the situation is, it's good. I do think it is good to have a beneficial. For my time, specifically for my situation, most professors at the seminary, they may serve as interims here and there, but most of them are primary at the seminary and secondary in the church. I'm primary in the church and secondary at the seminary, so I'm a little different. But for example, there are times during the semester where a lot of my time is dedicated to the seminary. But when you get to, when the semester is over, well, my grading's done, my teaching's done. There's a little break, little window.
Yep.
So there, I guess, phases of intensity is the kind of the term I like to use. I haven't. So if I'm going to do something outside with another role, I have to do it within this time slot because it requires some good time management skills. I don't think when you're using the language of primary and secondary, if you're primary in the vocational workforce, I don't think you should necessarily say, "Oh, ministry is just my secondary job,"
Sure,
because it's a primary calling. So I would say one of these occupations is going to take primacy with your mental energy, providing compensation, wages, benefits. But even if that's not the church, it doesn't mean the church is less important.
Right.
So I do believe it's good because when it gets to time management, how are you going to prioritize your time?
Right.
Because if you have two competing interests, two competing time slots, does your boss, if you work for someone else, does the person who helps you make decisions about how you use your time or where you need to be and how you need to go about your days, are they understanding of this? And do those two perceptions of the job align? And does he see you as what he or she is, your boss I'm talking about? Do they see your profession? Are they using the same categories? Do they see what they're asking you to do as primary and you see it as secondary? So you want to make sure you're on the same terms.
Yeah,
with
I mean,
them.
I'd say most congregations are not thinking like, oh yeah, we're happy to be your second job. And most businesses, especially and maybe there's a little bit different situation working with a seminary that's training and equipping ministers, but most secular jobs especially are not like, man, we're glad that you give us a few hours a week. But
right.
We're so thankful that you're doing ministry and that's the thing that you're most passionate about.
Yeah.
In my experience, a lot of guys that might be tempted towards, thinking, okay, there's levels of my work here. Not in terms of a priority issue. It can also be a heart issue.
Yeah.
For why they might think of one as primary or one as secondary. And that could be for a few different reasons. And one might be a sense of calling, because you go through this whole process, Lord willing, you go through this whole process with your local church, with those that have invested in your life, that I feel this sense of call to ministry, that God is calling me to equip the saints. And then there's a process of affirming that call. There's preparation in that call. And then you find yourself also, getting a job to help support it.
Right.
And that can minimize a secular job for a pastor in their mind whenever they've put so much mental and heart energy around that call towards vocational ministry. Also, like there could be a difference in a sense of importance.
Yeah.
And it becomes, the holiness factor that like I'm doing sacred God's work, the way that I serve the church. But, whenever I go work at the restaurant, that's just me trying to, make ends meet. Yeah. And so some of those things can become, a pride issue. Lastly, it can also be a bit of an identity issue. And you get a sense of a fulfillment from one to the, I'm doing important work here and this is meaningless or this is less meaningful. And, bivocational guys, we'll get into this a little bit more later, I think, but they have both a challenge and a unique opportunity to be in the shoes of a lot of the members of their congregation and understanding how God makes all work meaningful.
Sure.
And to have not just a conceptual understanding of integrating our faith and work, but to actually be able to put that into practice as you see that, like God is glorified in the paper route as much as in the preaching, like that these things all can be done for the glory of God. He hasn't just called you to one thing and then left it up to you to figure out the rest. And he's like surprised. He's like, "Oh, good. I'm glad you found that second job. The thing I care about is over here. So you do that. You come over here whenever.
It's all His creation.
That's right.
It's honoring His creation, being stewards of His creation, and I would think Paul as a tent maker. I just don't see him as a second tier, bottom of the barrel, low budget tent maker. I think he used those skills to the best of his ability. I'm not saying he was the best in town, but I think he had quality work because he was invested in the role God had called him into. to bring the word to those who hadn't had it. We say that in Romans chapter 15.
If we're discipling our people, that the gospel is something that, because it impacts and reshapes your identity, it's something that it touches every aspect of your life.
Not just the church.
Then that's going to be true of you, the minister, as well as you think about your approach to a second or third job. So there certainly can be some hard issues there, both making the decision to go bivocational as well as navigating it when you're in it. For you, because you're also in maybe a different situation from some of the bivo guys that are working a very secular job and serving the church or planting a church. How have you seen the work in your two vocations? How do they relate to one another? How have you seen that relationship?
Well, I will say before we get into that, while I was in seminary, I was an automotive service technician. So I understand the blue-collar daily grind aspect.
Which came first for you? Seminary, like being a professor, or pastoring or serving in the church? I was
interim pastor.
Okay.
And while I was doing the automotive service technician, I was doing pastoral internship. But primarily, I was working 35 hours a week in a dealership.
Wow.
Engines, transmissions, all that. So I understand that aspect and trying to be a witness in a very difficult world. So I can, back to your question regarding, I'm sorry, I lost my.
Yeah. How do you see your two jobs relating to one another?
Complementing one another. Well, that's a great question. I got the blessing of being, a faculty member. So I'm always in the theological or the academic realm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not thinking about, how do I rebuild this transmission and, okay, what do I got to preach on Sunday?
Right.
So I'm able to use some of what I'm teaching in the church, and which is refining. I am doing a course this semester called Discipleship Strategies, and the course has really challenged me as I look at our discipleship process at New Life and how tangible is it? How successful is it? How am I implementing it? Because we know as pastors, there's a lot that goes in our head, is happening in our head. It doesn't mean that it's being picked up and understood by the congregation. Because if you were to ask your leadership council or your leadership team, whatever structure you're in, are y'all seeing this? They'd be like, no. And like, how? I don't see how you can not see that, because, we haven't done a good job of clarifying or putting an image form or describing their discipleship strategy. So for this class particularly, this semester, I can speak currently, it keeps me sharp. It helps me look at my own ministry through the lens of what I'm teaching. Mm-hmm. And I've actually created a growth track at the church. I wish I would have completed this many years ago, but we did it now. So it's current now. So, just tangible step 1, step 2, new life, new commitments, new family, new mission, next level leadership, kind of walking people through the steps of discipleship so that they understand, hey, this is the path you're on. Kind of like, if you're in a job, you might start at the bottom and you might work your way up. There's a particular pathway to either, upper level management or mid-level management, whatever entity you're working at. But I think we can often assume that people just know.
Yeah.
So for me, just particular this class, it has helped me think through the tangible aspect. Okay, here's discipleship. It's more than what's the steps to it, because our people they need that, especially in the hustle and bustle and fast paced sense of our current life. Teaching at a seminary also keeps me in the academic field. Keeps me, the Homiletical Society, being kind of on the cutting edge of evangelical homiletics in North America. It helps me, meet various, homileticians, preachers from different denominations, and understand what's going on nationally, for preaching and the current of preaching. It helps me in various ways. It helps me to know, from a professor perspective, it helps me know the future that's coming into the church. Like, I'm training the next leaders. Yeah. So here's what's coming. Here's and I'm sitting here knowing what they need to know. I want to give you this. You need to know this. You need to understand this. So it helps me constantly be evaluating, what do I need to be mentoring these students to do and to be?
Yeah.
We use the language of Christ-likeness a lot. Paul uses the language of maturity so much. He uses it in Philippians chapter 3, verse 14 through 16. He uses it in Ephesians chapter 1. I think he uses it in Ephesians chapter 5. I at least know in chapter 1 he talks about Christ being the head. Hebrews uses it. He uses it in Colossians chapter 1, verse 29. So there's this concept for maturity. And I really kind of brought that into the discipleship strategies course this semester of the whole church being mature in Christ. So I don't think I would have that concept if I wasn't teaching this course. It's just something that I've been forced in preparation to think through as a New Testament. That's my minor of what Paul and the New Testament and is calling us to be and to do as the church.
Well, and like I said, not everybody watching this is going to be seminary faculty as their second job.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that it's impossible as you're faithful in both fields to also not see both impacting one another.
Absolutely.
Too. And like you mentioned, you're training and equipping the next generation of ministry leaders. It would be incredibly hard to not also then have a passion for leadership development within your local church as you see that that's the work that I'm doing and getting to see that on the front lines.
Yeah.
I when I was in the early stages of church planting in New York City, I also worked as a server at a Spanish restaurant in my neighborhood. And I was new to New York. I was from the New Orleans area, so I was getting to know the community. And man, in the Bible studies I was leading when I was preaching, a lot of the apologetic questions I was seeking to answer in my sermons came out of the conversations and the things that I was hearing, both talking with people and listening as a server at a restaurant in my community.
Yeah.
And so that's what faithfulness looks like, right? Again, we come back to that whole life discipleship of your people is something that also applies to the pastor. The shepherd is also a sheep. And you have a unique opportunity to see how God works in a variety of vocations when you're in a variety of vocations. Now, any Bivo conversation always gets to the topic of how to deal with the time, right? And like how to address, and there might be other challenges as well too, but that's one that kind of consistently comes up is, hey, I only got so many hours in the day and my mind always tends to be on one thing. And especially with pastoral ministry, it can feel like it's hard to ever feel off, right? Because there's always the burden of knowing that, what's going on with the people in your church and things that come at you at different times of the day. How have you, I'm not going to suppose that you have that all figured out. If you do, we want to advertise the book on that for you here.
Right.
But, how have you gone about addressing some of those challenges?
Right. So, I have 5 children.
Yeah, right. That too.
So I think having healthy boundaries is good. We live in a fast-paced society. And in my historical study, and I think we've always worked hard as human beings. Technology advances, bridges, construction, and transportation has changed the way we live over the last 150 years. But we've replaced that busyness with a sense of hurriedness. And I feel like most people run around like the beginning of, I'm late for a very important date. I have 4 daughters. Is it Alice in Wonderland?
Yeah.
I was trying to think which one. I really get all my princesses ran together. And I think that is a good, and remember that was 50, 60, 80 years ago when that was written.
Right.
It's kind of, prescient and like a lot of C.S. Lewis's work is prescient, for today. And I just see us as a people constantly moving. So it's easy to get caught up in that. So as time management, I think that's one thing is you have to be on guard for. And I'm not just talking about your physical body moving. I'm talking about your mind moving.
Yeah.
Rumination, maladaptive coping strategies and moving forward, continuing to respond to situations in the same way, even though they don't work just right. Because we feel naturally more tense. We're just less calm as a people. Anxiety's up, loneliness is up, depression's up. So remember, I remind myself that I'm not the only one. If I do struggle with hurriedness, I'm not the only one. Most of my congregation feels the same way.
Yep.
So, but I have to set the precedent because if their pastor is frazzled and running around, then it's going to be more difficult for them. So I've kind of developed a personal strategy for using reminders on my phone and calendar dates. Mm-hmm. So if it's something that I have to do, it's absolutely necessary, it's in my phone as a calendar. If it's kind of my to-do list, it's on a reminder.
Okay.
So
it's like triaging your to-do list.
Yeah. Yes. Excuse me. So I have significant things that I can't miss on the calendar, and the reminder that can roll off, that can roll over. That if I didn't get to it today, I can do it tomorrow.
Yep.
Today I will, have to leave and go down to the seminary in a little bit, and then I'll multitask on the way there and do a couple things, so that's on a day-to-day basis. And I make my students in one of my courses do a 24-hour calendar because most people don't do that anymore. I remember hearing about Drew Brees and his capacity and he had 10 minutes, every 10 minutes of his day allotted out.
Okay, so quick story on that, because one of the pastors at the church I served at in New Orleans was a chaplain to the Saints, and I remember filling in for him one time and giving a sermon before in their little chapel the Saturday before a game, and Drew's the one guy I was expecting to be there that wasn't in there whenever I started speaking, and I knew a couple of them because they went to our church, but I didn't know a lot of them, and I was a Saints fan, so I'm seeing the guys in there and speaking to them while I'm like maybe 7 minutes in to a little 20-minute devo. And Drew walks in. Okay. And it's hard not to be a little disrupted by that because hey, look, there's Drew Brees. All right. And he takes the seat in the very front, in the very middle, and he pulls out 3 journals and opens up these three journals, and he just starts writing. He's not looking up at me. He's just looking at these 3 things. I'm like, okay, well, that's stay before a game. He's the quarterback. Like he's coming because he's showing up, but he's going to do whatever it is that he's doing. He's preparing for the game. One of the guys that I know introduces me to him afterwards, and being the nosy person that I am, I take a little peek at his notebooks while we're talking. And, all 3 notebooks was notes on my talk. Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea how that's organized or coordinated, but he had 3 different kinds of notes, and I don't know if that was like thoughts on the passage and thoughts on what to do. But he knew what he was doing when he got there. He had a system, and I think that's the important part. You're gonna you're having a system, and you're working that system.
I don't have anybody cooking my food for me. Right. I'm cooking. I'm making meals for 4 children. 3 or 4 children every morning. So I'm doing that grunt work. No one's doing it for me. So he has the system, down. But, I know that I need to be on the road by a certain amount of time, or I'm going to get stuck in traffic. Yep. I know that certain days are seminary prep days. I know that certain days, I'm, depending on my schedule, I might be in New Orleans, I might not be in New Orleans. And I think you have to learn the healthy boundary of no. And it sounds like I don't know how to say no to anything, and some days I wonder that, but I do. I
thank you for saying yes to the podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, and that was tough for me. Yeah, because you want to be involved in things going on. You want to grow and develop, and you want your career. Yeah. You want to say yes, and you want to be a part of what God is doing, but you can't be a part of what God is doing if you're exhausted. Right. So, and I think even in our culture, just hearing the word no sometimes is almost mean. Right. Some people take it as mean. What did I do wrong? Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not. It's healthy. I think about, the Holy Spirit telling Paul, no, you're not going to Asia. You're going to Macedonia. And that was, that worked out well.
The way I think of it, I have a 19-month-old, and our second is on the way. And when we went from 0 kids to 1 kid, what came with that meant that we started meal planning.
Yeah.
We started thinking through, okay, this is what we're going to eat for the week. Going from 1 kid to 2 kids. And I know that I'm speaking to somebody with 5 kids, but going from 1 kid to 2 kids probably means that we're shifting. We're not just meal planning. Now we're shopping at Sam's or Costco. Like we're buying a little bit more in bulk.
Yeah.
One of the greatest resources that we have for our complexity is intentionality.
Yeah.
And not being the enemy of the moment, but also planning for the things that you can control.
Yeah.
And then using flexibility where you have for however the Lord may lead as well.
And you have to have margin for those things you can't control.
Right.
I work on cars, used cars, and they break from time to time. And so you have to have margin to deal with those issues. And if you find yourself not having any margin in your neck, because the reality of life is that things break, children get sick, so forth. So as far as I'm good at administration, I'm really good at administration. So I think my approach. We just lost our matriarch at our church, and I used to always make time every 3 months to go just eat lunch with her on her porch. She was a widow. She came to church, almost regularly. But once we had her funeral, her family came up to me and said, "Thank you for always sitting on the porch with her. She really enjoyed those times." So for me, it was pastoral ministry, but really it was me unplugging from everything else while I was doing ministry. And I think we have to have that in doing ministry. We can't just be high energy, do. We have to stop and enjoy the activity. Like I legitimately enjoyed being with her as we sat there and just, took an hour out of my day. There's a lot else I could have been doing, but just resting. And I think, and that's tough for me as someone who's a doer. We have to just be with God and be involved in his ministry, not just do for God. And that's one of the challenges. Peter Scazzero talks about that a lot. And that really impacted me about a decade ago. So it's helped me moving forward. I'm not an expert at it. By no means.
Yeah, Pete Scazzero's emotionally healthy spirituality was
because my tendency is to overcommit. I know that.
Well, and you said one of the things you mentioned was that you are you're a little more gifted in administration, which is not true of every pastor, especially of senior pastors and guys that might just they want to be thinking of vision and how the church is moving forward and they're kind of thinking big picture a lot of times. So for those guys that might be in a Bivo role, but also administration's not their strong suit.
Sure.
What's where do they turn to? Like what's the advice for them?
Well, when I say administration, I don't like writing protocol and procedure. I like outsourcing that, but I think it comes from the practical aspect of mechanical. I like to see things on the road.
Sure.
You fix a car, you have to put it on the road. Yep. You have to make sure it works. So it's good to have these vision casting ideas, but what is the practical connecting that to the day-to-day operation of the church and making sure that it connects with the overall mission and vision of the church? Administration. There's a couple things. I don't have a secretary. So everything runs through me, and I talk about that with other faculty and talk about that with some. You have to have a system, a healthy system for you, so that you're not constantly overwhelmed with emails. I delegate well. I'm 9 years in at my leadership team. Most of them have been with me the whole time. Yep. Here, do it. Call me if you need something.
That's important. Yeah.
I trust you. I'm here to lead you, to provide the insights. Just like we had a fall festival the other day. Here, what do you need from me? That was my question. What do you need from me? Church debit card? Here you go. I know my role for that would be making sure the gospel goes forth. That was my primary concern. And I hand a lot of that off to my leaders, because if you've trained and developed and built your leaders. Of course, now they're busy too. And I think also the kind of leader. We have a lot of young families at our church, which a lot of people are, that's great, but they don't have a lot of margin.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of children.
Sure.
They're in the same predicament I'm in. And I don't have a lot of, the generation, older Gen Xers. Which, maybe their children are grown now. They have a little bit more margin. They're up in their careers, so they may have a little more time.
I think that's so important what you said, because pastors are going to sacrifice to serve their church.
Yeah.
And Bivo pastors might be called to sacrifice in unique ways to serve their church. But you are not the savior of your church. Mm-hmm. And the two words you said, both outsourcing and delegating, you don't have to have the gift of administration to also have the humility to realize it's not all about you.
Yeah, administration means you hand off well. Doesn't mean you do everything.
And those things you think of Paul, like, man, we have very limited opportunities in the book of Acts. I think Paul in Athens, maybe in Acts 17.
Yeah.
And then his crew joins back up with him in the next chapter. But like by and large, he's with people.
Yeah.
He is writing letters to churches, but then other people are going and doing the ministry while he's at those churches. And so, Paul tells Titus to put elders in place at all the churches, right? And he's speaking plural there for a reason. The work that we have, and independent on how your church is set up, especially if you're a church planner, you might only have one person that's a recognized pastor or staff on your church.
Yeah.
But our role is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And increasingly, as you're serving, like, hand over some ministry.
Yeah, a traditional church, they typically they are, laity and this clergy divide is strong there.
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury in a church plant. You have to be out among the people.
So I want to kind of maybe put a bow on this Bivo conversation before we lean into one aspect of it with what you're doing with the seminary.
Yeah.
For those guys that are out here watching this, listening to this, that are considering going bivocational, or they're going through the process of church planning right now. Maybe they've gone through assessment and they're kind of looking at what they need to fundraise and also what they think is going to be possible, and saying, hey, this might be something I need to do. And any advice that you would give them as they're considering that move?
Yeah. I would say first, don't think of yourself as a second level minister.
That's good.
The median church size is 65 now.
Right.
It's 137 20 years ago. Hopefully the next 20 years is not 100%, the same decline, same level of decline, which would be almost 100%, from 137 to 65. So don't think of yourself as second level. I have a PhD and 2 master's degrees. I'm not a second level pastor. Also, think of if you do choose to do choose that route. Remember the role of active and passive as it comes to income. How much time, like I couldn't go back to auto service mechanic, auto technician and pastor. It's too much energy, too much mental energy.
Yep.
Because I'm constantly having to think about and diagnose and work and repair. Like there's not going to be enough time remaining in my day to even focus on, a church per se.
Right.
So think about the occupation you're choosing. Think about how it's going to relate, and trust God that if that is the route you have to go, that there's something out there, that He has went ahead of you, that He knows your situation, that He's not blindsided. You might feel that way sometimes, and that He is working in this situation for your good and for the kingdom, for the advancement of the kingdom. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would say to bivocational. Just think about the time constraints, your family. Maybe it's, I remember for a long time, kind of education was, teaching was, high school, secondary was something that pastors did. That's kind of changed now with the changing education system, the marketing education system.
True, and even COVID has changed kind of and opened the door for a lot more remote work.
So
that gives you opportunity for some flexibility.
Yeah,
and there's resources out there increasingly for pastors and church planters that are making that transition to think through not just how to manage your time, but also what kind of work is out there, and that as a pastor, especially if you're a seminary trained pastor, your resume written a proper way actually sets you up for some roles that would serve you well as a pastor,
right?
Because you have certain management skills that are in demand in the workforce.
And I think that's important. Good point to point out. There's a gentleman up in New York, I think.
Eric Hoke.
I help pastors get jobs. And he's dedicated his career to moving your resume to a marketplace resume. Remote work, you mentioned it. Honestly,
he started off as a NAM planter.
Did he?
Okay. In the Bronx.
All right. So, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of really high-paying blue-collar jobs out there. I mean, I could do auto service mechanic. I just couldn't do it 50 hours a week.
See, and that's the thing, because there's some work out there that
I could do it for 20 hours.
Sure.
Like plumbing or electrical. Of course, you'd have to own your own business, to set, or have an employer who understands, hey, let me call this guy in when I need him. Kind of work, for HVAC is kind of a seasonal-based work. So maybe you could find something and work seasonal-based. And I know some people back home who farming. That's more seasonal based, So just thinking through what that looks like and letting your church know, hey, I need help here. During this phase, during this season, I'm going to be very busy here. That might mean we get someone to come in and do a 3-part sermon series or a 4-part sermon series. So I don't have to preach this sermon series, because that constant creativity is a mental burden. For especially if you're doing two sermons or more a week, whereas I do a sermon and a lecture a week. And you want to be good every week. And if you don't have the mental energy, a really good sermon takes some margin, because it's artistic. It's not just sitting down and doing exegesis. It's not copying, pasting from commentaries. You're having to, both be involved in your congregation, know your audience, hear their struggles, hear their difficulties, infuse that with the mission and vision of the church and with the health of the church, and fuse that with the text. And that's just from a mental perspective. That takes a lot of work. Yeah.
And you mentioned like having those conversations with your church. Also have them with your network or your denomination. We're speaking to Sin Louisiana church planters, and your coach, your local association within the denomination might be aware of specific opportunities, but also that's increasingly something that they're helping all their planters navigate. So be vocal about it. Be intentional with thinking through the right kind of work that can complement your role in ministry. And then finally, and we already hit this before, but I don't think we can hit it enough, invest in your team. For church planters especially, invest in your team. God has not called you to just plant this church alone as the white knight that's come in to save a community. He is already working ahead of you. And yes, he wants to work through you, but he doesn't just want to work with you. And so as you're building a core team, already be prepared, whether you're bivocational or not, to think through the ways that you can be equipping the saints and releasing the saints for ministry. Now, as we start to close out, one other topic I want to address specifically because of your unique role serving as faculty at a seminary is thinking through the pastor as theologian. Because pastoral ministry, there's a lot of things that are involved in pastoral ministry, right? I love Tim Whitmer in his little book, The Shepherd Leader. He talks about know, feed, lead, and protect the sheep, right? There's a lot of roles to pastoring well. And built into all of those things is we are students of God's word and teachers of God's word. And so for you, how would you define the role of a pastor as theologian?
I think a pastor theologian is a pastor who has the training and skill set to take the truths of God and impart them to the congregation in a way that is relevant for our current time. So I have a good friend, Dr. Byron Brown at Redemption Church, has a conference every year, Feed, Shepherd, Follow, based on John chapter 21. Feed my sheep, shepherd my sheep, follow me. Feed, shepherd, follow. Yeah. So I think of the pastoral theologian as someone who has his hand in academia, but is able to take the content of academia and put it into the practical life. He's able to move beyond academic jargon and fuse those horizons with the person who is struggling with addiction, or a child with addiction, or a family going through struggling having children, and taking the various aspects of the ethical, the theological, and the ethical exhortation of the text. If you think through Romans, you think through Ephesians, the theological grounds the ethical. We do because of who He is. We are this. And I would say that our world is okay with us just believing what we believe.
Yeah.
They're not okay with us telling them how to conduct our lives. So that's the chasm for some people. And I think that's where us as pastoral theologians is able to speak into these issues with a grounding in the text. And I don't mean, PhD,
right.
A.W. Tozer, I believe, was untrained, I think he was one of the ones I'm thinking about who never went to seminary or never went to theological training. It's good to have theological training, but it's not a requirement.
Right.
We strongly advise people to have it. But maybe you're self-taught. Maybe, God has blessed you and gifted you in a situation where you are self-taught, or you have a situation where you can, invest, 8, 10, 12 hours a week in the learning. And, you've gotten someone who's helped you, get on a good theological path. So I see the pastoral theologian, I don't think he's necessarily measured with how deep he goes. I think from a Western perspective, we say that, he's deep, or,
Yeah.
I think it's also how wide and how much you can bring that into the life of your congregation.
Yeah.
Because if you talk in a level that doesn't, and I've had this come back on me a couple times, talking that seminary talk. So I've completely, eliminated that language from my sermons, and I've actually try to do more visual sermons now. Augustine talks about at the end of De Doctrina, talking about leading people when they will agree with you, but they won't move on that agreement. And he talked about using the grand style. And I wrote my dissertation on a gentleman who used the grand style. And if you look back historically, a lot of our excellent preachers, they were image-based preachers. C.S. Lewis talks about his capacity to not, to see in pictures. Gardner Taylor, the guy I wrote on seeing in pictures.
Jesus taught, yeah.
And I mean, who are we competing against? We're competing against Netflix,
right? Bezos
and Prime. I mean, we got Bezos on Washington Post, and we got him on Prime. So he's got us on our writing and our visual. So, and these teams have billions of dollars dedicated to marketing and content development.
Yeah,
that's grasping for your time. So, I think not just letting them hear, but also helping them see what God is doing around them, because I think that's a challenge for us. That's just not our cultural concept. If we talk international missions, we talk about people in other places, they're always looking for, I ain't gonna say that, there are. When you hear stories back from where where Christianity is growing, you are hearing, at least some of the stories I'm hearing, people experiencing God. They're seeing Him work on a day-to-day basis, and there's a holy expectation there. They may not see a lot of fruit as far as what we would consider traditional church growth. In other words, there's not larger churches being built, but God is working there. He's healing people and glorifying His name. He's, showing up in dreams of Muslims, and they're, leading them to Christ. You're like, what a story, So, so I think helping our people to see that God is at work around them, even in the traffic to get here, even in, we have to slow down. Maybe we're too busy. Maybe we don't have the right frequency tuned in for God to see, and we're not turned to the right channel. We also have to remember just offering our people knowledge is, I think Google is, web browsers, they get access to data. We're overloaded with data, man.
Mm-hmm.
It is just data dump all the time. So I think moving our pastoral theologian to shepherd these people, to treasure and to seek Christ, to want to know, to want to be mature, to help to teach them the desire on why you need to pursue holiness and why that matters. Not just having content as seminary 20, 40, 50 years ago was kind of more focused on content and maybe the Greek words and the Hebrew words. And now I think it's kind of shifted to, man, we have to motivate these people to pursue Christ, because we don't have that cultural wind with us anymore of, hey, they're showing up. They're just coming to church. They're here.
Yeah, right.
So
showing people how to pursue Christ and their need for Christ, that's the job.
Yeah, that's it.
and if our God is the sovereign Lord over all the universe, then that means that there's not a single thing in someone's life that it's not his domain, that he doesn't look over and, like the quote says, and says, mine.
He can step into it anytime.
And that is, and so helping people see the world through a theological lens.
Yeah.
Because it is a theological world.
Yeah.
That is something that requires scripture, requires study, requires contextualization, as you're talking about, even for understanding your people, because they're asking unique questions that other context isn't asking.
And every church has different questions they're asking based on the people.
Right. But, and that's, I think it was John Piper said, the fight of the Christian life is a fight to see.
Yeah.
And the pastor is a theologian because that is the tool that we have to help people see God and see the world in light of God.
Yes.
Now, last thing I want to talk about, because, if it wasn't, all of the papers and the homiletical societies and all the things you're involved with is, on the seminary side of the world, as well as, pastoring a church and all the things that come with that. You have also taken on a new endeavor. Yeah. With starting a new ministry while it is day.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit. Yeah.
And first of all, I respect you like crazy, because as you continue to do more things and have 5 kids, and I'm thinking of 1 to 2, what is that even going to look like for me?
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about While It Is Day and what led you to start this new ministry.
Yeah. While It Is Day Ministries is a nonprofit that serves underprivileged and underserved locations with quality Christian leadership training material. We have so much here in America as far as Christian theological training and material. You can go down, there's no really brick and mortar stores anymore, but Barnes and Noble maybe, or Amazon. You could pull up 1,000 books on psychology. You could probably get 20 or 30, maybe 50, maybe 100 from a Christian perspective. You just don't have that anywhere else. You just don't have that in our world. And so several years ago, I listened to the Voice of the Martyrs podcast. Every Monday morning, that's my routine. That's how I stay engaged with what God is doing in the world. 25 minutes. What is God, because it's so easy to get caught up in the routine. What is God doing elsewhere? Maverick's another good podcast, season 2. And, finding, maybe, Sin Network has some good podcasts on what God is doing maybe in America and church planning. Find something that anchors you into what God is doing, not just in your ministry, but in other places. And that, for me, that was VOM. And I heard, the fastest growing church in the world is in Persia right now, which is Afghanistan, the Persian speaking, the people of Afghanistan and Iran. And I'm thinking, surely you're kidding me, right? And then I began, networking with people and found out God is just moving at such an amazing rate, an amazing pace there post-COVID. And some of the challenges they have is resources. And this is a mindset that is hard for me to wrap my mind around, because I can walk up to you, like we met at a Christian event.
Right.
And I walked up to you and we talked.
Yeah.
And me not being able to walk up to someone and ask them, do they know Jesus, because they might be a secret agent and turn me in.
Mm-hmm.
And then where you Google everything and it's filtered through an Islamic context, Islamic worldview.
Yeah.
So I just began praying about, how can I use what I have, the skills I have right now, training ministers to help others who have such a deficiency. They don't have access to it, and they don't know how to get access to it. So I found some people who were already working there and just began partnering with them. And I knew the need was great because I'm like, what do you need? Do you need Christian scriptures, New Testament? He just said, we need everything, anything you can offer.
Yeah.
So God just began laying that burden on my heart. And I have to take what we have that is in abundance in a resource-heavy, resource-laden country such as ours, where Christianity is on the decline. And I see my primary role is helping, training these indigenous people through someone who's already connected with them. And now it's kind of expanded into other locations and just getting it there for free and just offering to them, hey, I want you to have this. They probably can't afford it anyway. Some areas can, some areas can't. Even if they do purchase it, it's a risk of being tracked and flagged. Yep. So, it's all pseudonymous material. I'm not seeking any glory out of it. I'm just trying to build this nonprofit, devote time into, what we're giving down here at New Orleans and our, many great theological seminaries. We're such a blessed nation to have the training and that we have. So blessed and grateful to have that, but also using that training, that time, these resources to strengthen the church and, in Africa, Asia. It goes back to me where Henry Blackaby says, found out where God is working and join him there.
Right.
I want to be where God is working at. And I think all Christians, we have different ways of saying that. Mm-hmm. For some, it's, I want to go back to 1950 when the church was full. For some, it's, I want to be on the mission field. For some, it's, the youth group. But really what it really gets down to is they experience God there. So I want to be a part of what God is doing and just partner with him where he's working. He's already working there. He doesn't need me. He invites me to participate. And
that's incredible. Like, what comes to mind, is Barnabas early in Acts that sees the early church having unique needs and not the resources to meet those needs. And he's like, okay, he asked the question, what's in my hands? I have some land, I can sell the land, and that's something I can provide to be able to meet these needs. And you uniquely gifted and suited and positioned with seminary content, ongoing lectures, being in that space, having a mind for that kind of work already, and then seeing a need and burdened by that need, saying, God, here's what I have. How can you use it? And whether that's written content, audio content that's being created, being translated into these other languages, and then now being able to be distributed to Christian leaders as they serve in a difficult context.
And equipping other churches. If other churches want some of this material, I license it out. Use it. It's partnering with the kingdom and doing the kingdom.
Right.
It's not me.
And so if people wanted to join While It Is Day in praying for the work, in financially supporting the work and the translation projects that are going on, or if they want to use some of that curriculum for their own ministry, for their own personal study,
absolutely.
How can they get involved?
Yeah. No, While It Is Day info, whileItisday.info.
Yep.
And that's the name of the website. We're under construction now. So it should be launched within the next few weeks, depending on, what happens in the next few weeks in my life. I have a lot of things to juggle, but
sorry, I can give the shameless plug on there too, because we're the ones working on that project with you. And so,
I wasn't going to say it.
Helping build the course content out for you and the website and all those things.
So, while, it comes from John chapter 4.
Yep.
John chapter 9, verse 4.
Right.
And Jesus is healing the blind man. And he says, we must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. For night is coming when no man can work. So it's those 4 words, whileItisday.info. And I tried to go with something that wouldn't be flagged international with kind of the .info.
Yep.
And, I'm looking, various methods to distribute, working in various places and just trying to use, like I said, the training, the gifting that God has gifted me for the betterment of the kingdom.
Man, that's incredible. We'll put the link to the URL, which should be launched within the next few weeks. By the time of this podcast, it should be up and live, but we'll have that in the show notes for this episode. Yeah. Derek, thanks so much, man, for being a part of this conversation. Yeah. And I know we got to go in a lot of different directions today, but man, that's because you're just a very interesting person in my life, and I'm glad to learn a little bit more about you.
She was. I'm a very interesting person, baby. It's good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for the invitation. God
Absolutely.
bless.